So you've recently been diagnosed with sciatica or a severe herniated disc, and it's extremely painful and debilitating, and you have no idea how long this is going to last. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is light at the end of the tunnel and there is hope, and that's why I thought I'd make this video. It's been 1 year for me now, exactly 1 year to the date, and I'm in a very, very different position, and all because of, going through some things that were unfortunate during my recovery process that I wish I had known before, and just basically having to learn as I went along. So I'm here to share my 8 tips on how to deal with sciatica and recover from it, and in a way that's sustainable and lasting. So tip number 1, understanding the timeline and radical acceptance. And by radical acceptance, what I mean is to, essentially really accept the fact that this is happening to you, that it is extremely unusual, it's out of the ordinary, there's no one to blame, and it is going to take as long as it's going to take to recover. For me, my doctor had to tell me repeatedly that this was going to be a 3 to 6 month recovery process at minimum. And I had a back injury from early in my 20s, and this pain would only last at the very most a week, and so that was my frame of reference. So for someone to tell me 3 to 6 months was earth-shattering, and I had a really hard time accepting it. So I hit YouTube and I watched a lot of videos, and I heard a lot of different things, a lot of differing opinions on exactly how long it takes to recover, and all kinds of differing opinions on the kinds of treatments that were out there. And I watched so much that it ended up really confusing me. In the end, it did actually take 6 months before I got back on my feet. For me, the first 2 to 3 weeks, I was bedridden, and what I mean by that is to even sit up for longer than 1 to 2 minutes was extremely painful, and would bring me to 10 out of 10 pain. Basically, it was rushing to my bathroom and back to my bed. To get in and out of a car was one of the most agonizing experiences I've ever had, on a continual basis. And so that was about the first 2-3 weeks. In terms of being able to actually be on my feet and stand on my feet and be able to walk around with assistance, it was about 1 month in that I was able to, move around on my own with assistance, still in, between 8 out of 10 to 10 out of 10 pain, even with heavy medication. But, at least I was able to walk down a hallway to an appointment, or, go to the bathroom and be in there for, a few minutes without having to rush back to my bed as soon as possible. So that was about 2-3 weeks. In terms of being able to go back to work, it took almost exactly 2 months, so 8 weeks, for me to be able to technically go back to work. And by that, I had to do limited hours. I couldn't do anything that involved lifting or standing or sitting for too long, and I had to do basically half a day to be able to tolerate being at work. After the second month, I was able to move around quite freely with a cane. I could begin to drive again, maybe at the 3-month mark. I started to drive again confidently without worrying about having a spasm happen. And about 4 months in, after heavy physical physiotherapy and physical treatment from a multitude of different disciplines, about 4 months in, I was able to return to a gym and start to begin the major physiotherapy process that involved exercise. At the 6-month mark, I was able to lift weights, I was able to swim, I was able to do quite a few things that involve physical activity with minimal to no pain. So that brings me to tip number 2, and that's understanding, the different kinds of medications out there. For some of us, we don't like taking medication. We don't like particularly heavy medication, that can have long-term implications as far as liver and kidney goes. But, a sciatica and a severe herniated disc is one of these situations where, there aren't a lot of ways of getting around heavy medication. And what I mean by that is the most important thing is to start moving and moving as often and as much as possible to really be able to shorten the timeline in terms of recovery. So at the very beginning, I found it beyond possible to be able to move for any more than a couple of seconds until I was actually put on heavy medication, and that's what allowed me to. And I couldn't wait to get off of them, but it really was kind of a necessary evil. So really talking to my doctor and trying different things. They're going to put you on the painkillers, the Oxycontins, the Percocets, whatever it is that your doctor finds. But a really important one in terms of medication for me was a medication called gabapentin, and this may have a different name depending on where you live in the world. But gabapentin was one of these medications that really sort of helped me turn the corner in terms of mobility, in terms of tolerating the pain, and particularly because gabapentin is a nerve analgesic. It specifically targets the nerve in terms of pain, in terms of shutting off your pain receptors, and allows for you to move while your nerve is being aggravated, while your sciatic nerve is being aggravated, without sending your body into almost like a fight or flight sort of state where your muscles contract and it begins this vicious cycle of pain. So getting on gabapentin and being on a good anti-inflammatory like Celebrex, for example, really sort of helped me turn the corner in terms of keeping the inflammation down. Of course, you can do things that are more natural based for inflammation, your turmeric, your ginger, and other natural substances that promote a decrease in inflammation. But in this situation, having a heavy medication really made a difference for me, and like I said, I couldn't wait to get off them, but it was a necessary evil. So tip number 3, mobility. And what I mean by that is, finding the best ways to move around and as often and for as long as possible. For me, at the very beginning, like I said, it was so painful that I found, even rolling over in bed to be extremely agonizing. But getting on the right medications and accepting what was happening to me allowed me to begin to really start to focus on moving again. One of the first forms of assistance I had was, believe it or not, a walker. This was something that I fought my wife on tooth and nail. She insisted, after being my sort of nurse day in and day out and watching me, go through all kinds of pain, she insisted on me she insisted that I get a walker. And I'm somebody that had a 20-year career in, working with the elderly and with people with mental illness. And so there were a lot of walkers. And so I fought this, vehemently. I said, there's absolutely no way I'm going to be moving around in public with a walker. And thankfully, she, took it upon herself and didn't tell me, and went online and bought a walker. And I turned around one day and there it was. And it was an absolute godsend. I used the walker for about 3 weeks. And it made such a massive difference for me, because walkers are able to open and close and fit into a car. It also has a little seat that you can stop and sit down on if you can't take the pain and you happen to be in a hallway or a parking lot or something like that. So really, really good. To be quite honest, I probably would have used it longer than necessary if my wife hadn't accidentally backed over it on the way to one of our appointments. And so the timing was perfect, because it allowed me to move towards crutches. For crutches, I used those for about 2 weeks. And from crutches, I moved to a single hand cane, your traditional cane. I bought a cane that had an extra sort of wrist support that allowed me to have a sort of a wider grip, so I could bear more weight on the cane. But with all of these 3 methods of assistance, I would strongly encourage you to try to move towards getting rid of them as much as possible and moving as freely on your own as much as possible, so your body redevelops its ability, to move around. Your physiotherapist will strongly encourage this. In my case, I had to almost be taught to walk again because the sciatic nerve in my right leg had like disconnected from my brain. So I had to almost reattach, the process by which my brain would say to my leg, lift your foot, step forward. It was almost like a reconnection. It was quite severe. Exercise. And what I mean by that, at the beginning at least, is literally just moving. All you'll be able to do towards the beginning is, what you'll probably see a lot of on the internet, which is the prone push-up, where you're kind of doing the typical push-up position, but your hip is planted on the ground and you're pushing up as much as you can to try and create traction between your discs. Another beneficial movement is the cat stretch pose, where you're on all fours, arching your spine and then depressing your spine with your head back, making sure to hold for 3 seconds. During the early days of my recovery, if I was on my feet and in a bit of pain, I would stop and do this exercise. Do about 3 sets and hold for about 3 seconds. There's actually a really great YouTube channel called Athlean X, and if you look it up, the instructor on there is quite thorough in terms of explaining how the body works. Particularly, there's a video that he did on herniated discs, and some of the exercises that he shows are very atypical but also like extremely useful, and it made a huge difference for me. So look that up. Another really important part of mobility and exercise is traction. And if you've never heard of traction, essentially what that is pulling your spine apart, creating space between the joints. And this is good across the body, but particularly when it comes to herniated discs, you may be referred to a clinic that has a traction machine, and this is a machine where you're strapped in and it essentially pulls your spine apart. I did that for about 10 sessions. It was helpful, but to be quite honest, I found it just as useful to find a pull-up bar or a monkey bar in a park and basically just hang for as long as you can for about 3 sets. And just allowing the weight of your body to pull your spine down was really quite useful. Another form of exercise that really helped to move me towards recovery, and this is something that you should continue as long as possible, and that's swimming. People had been mentioning swimming from early on when I was in so much pain that even the thought of getting into a pool was so far-fetched. But as soon as I was able to, I started swimming, and because of the buoyancy, because of the low impact nature of that exercise, it really helped to create space in my joints, particularly helped with the retraction of the bulge. So as soon as you can start swimming, please swim. Doing the froggy stroke or whatever you call it was also quite useful because it involved your hips and your lower back.